The cold metal cuffs clamped around her wrists, biting into her skin. Judge Olivia Carter had been in handcuffs before, but never like this. Never on the other side of justice. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated her deep brown skin as she stood beside her sleek black Mercedes, her breath fogging in the crisp night air. The two officers, Officer Daniels and Officer Briggs, exchanged smug glances, their grip on their pistols still firm, as if she was some kind of threat. "Driving a little too nice of a car for someone like you, huh?" Daniels sneered, tugging her wrist slightly as he secured the cuffs tighter. Olivia inhaled sharply. "Someone like me." She had heard it all before. It was exhausting. "I told you," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm Judge Olivia Carter. If you just check." Yeah, Briggs interrupted, rolling his eyes. "And I'm the mayor." He turned to his partner. "They always got some excuse, don't they?" Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. "Every time." The weight of their assumptions pressed against her chest, but Olivia refused to let her fear show. "You're making a mistake," she warned. Briggs scoffed. "The only mistake is you thinking your fake judge story is gonna work on us." Daniels patted her down aggressively, lingering too long on her waist, her pockets. Olivia clenched her teeth. She had seen men like them in her courtroom before. Arrogant, reckless, unchecked. But never had she been at their mercy. "License and registration were valid, cars not stolen, but I say we bring her in anyway," Daniels muttered to Briggs, just low enough to make it clear they weren't following protocol. Briggs nodded. "Obstruction, maybe? Resisting arrest." Daniels grinned. "Oh yeah." She definitely looked like she was resisting. Olivia felt her stomach drop. It was happening. She had read the reports. She had ruled on cases just like this. And now, she was living it. Briggs yanked her toward the squad car. The metal of the cuffs cut deeper into her wrists, but she refused to cry out. She refused to give them that. Daniels leaned down, his voice smug. "You think you're in charge, don't you? Not tonight, sweetheart." The back door of the squad car slammed shut behind her. The officers strutted to the front seats, laughing, as if they had just scored a personal victory. Olivia sat in the suffocating darkness of the back seat, the smell of sweat and cheap air freshener filling her nostrils. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from fury. They didn't know. They didn't know that in less than 24 hours, she would be the one sitting in judgment over them. And when they finally found out, their faces would be priceless. The ride to the precinct was filled with the officers' smug chatter. Olivia sat in silence, her jaw clenched, her mind racing. This was a test of her patience, her power, and her resolve. The tires screeched as the car pulled up to the station. The two officers didn't rush to get her out. Instead, they stood outside the vehicle, chatting and chuckling, enjoying their moment of power. "Think she's some kind of lawyer or something?" Briggs muttered. "Probably a public defender. One of those do-gooders who think they're above the law," Daniels replied, laughing. Olivia let them have their moment. Oh, how short-lived it would be. When the door finally opened, Daniels grabbed her arm and hauled her out roughly. "Watch your head," he said, shoving her forward. Olivia didn't flinch. The precinct was buzzing with activity. Officers moved about, some booking suspects, others typing up reports. The moment she stepped inside, the eyes of several officers flicked toward her. A black woman in an elegant pantsuit, hands cuffed behind her back. It wasn't an unfamiliar sight to them, but something about her made them hesitate. She caught the sharp stare of an older officer at the front desk. Sergeant Hill. A man she had seen before, sitting in the gallery of her courtroom. His forehead creased in confusion as he looked from Olivia to the two officers dragging her in. Daniels slapped some paperwork on the desk, grinning. Picked her up a few blocks from the courthouse. Thought she was too good to follow orders. Hill's eyes narrowed. "And what charges exactly?" "Obstruction, resisting, you know how it is," Briggs chimed in. Hill didn't respond right away. He looked at Olivia, something clicking in his brain. Then his face froze. A slow, dawning horror settled over him as he recognized her. Olivia finally spoke, her voice steady. "Sergeant Hill, would you kindly inform these two officers exactly who I am?" Daniels and Briggs frowned. Hill's lips parted slightly, but no words came. He turned sharply to Daniels, his voice suddenly urgent. "You need to take those cuffs off. Now." Daniels let out a short laugh. "Come on, Sarge. What, she got you believing her story too?" Hill's voice dropped an octave, dangerously low. "Take them off." Briggs hesitated. "Sarge, what's the—" "I said now." Hill snapped, his voice echoing through the precinct. Several officers turned their heads, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Daniels, still not understanding, pulled the key from his belt and unlatched the cuffs. Olivia rubbed her wrists slowly, lifting her gaze, letting them feel the weight of her stare. The moment stretched in unbearable silence before Hill finally spoke, his voice cold as steel. "You two just arrested Judge Olivia Carter." Briggs went pale. Daniels' grin vanished. The entire precinct fell into a stunned hush. Olivia straightened her blazer, her voice composed but laced with undeniable authority. "And I'll be seeing both of you tomorrow morning," she said. "Because as fate would have it, I'm the judge presiding over your case." The color drained from Daniel's face. Briggs swallowed hard. Hill exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. The two officers looked at each other, then back at Olivia. Panic flickered behind their eyes. Because they knew. They were done for. The silence in the precinct was suffocating. Daniels and Briggs stood frozen, their faces drained of arrogance. The laughter, the smugness, gone. You're joking," Briggs stammered. "This is some kind of setup, right?" Olivia arched an eyebrow, her expression impassive. "Would you like to bet your career on that?" Hill let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "You two have no idea what kind of trouble you're in." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "This is insane. We didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't compliant." His voice cracked slightly, as if he himself didn't believe his own excuse. "Is that so?" Olivia tilted her head. "Tell me, Officer Daniels, which part of my compliance was the problem? When I handed you my license and registration? Or when I calmly asked you to verify my identity?" Daniels' mouth opened, but no words came out. Hill sighed and turned to her. "Judge Carter, if you want to file a complaint—" "Oh, Sergeant Hill," Olivia interrupted smoothly, adjusting her blazer. "We're far past complaints, wouldn't you say?" Hill exhaled sharply. He knew what she meant. This wasn't going away. Briggs ran a hand down his face. "Look, Judge Carter, we thought you were—" He stopped himself, realizing there was no way to phrase it that wouldn't make things worse. "You thought I was what?" Olivia pressed. "Another black woman in a nice car who must be up to no good." Briggs looked at Daniels, as if hoping his partner had a way out of this. Daniels stayed silent. "Tell me something," Olivia continued, stepping closer. "If I weren't a judge, how would this have ended?" No answer. She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Hill cleared his throat. "Judge Carter, I think we should—" "Oh, don't worry, Sergeant. I have no intention of making a scene." She turned her gaze back to Daniels and Briggs. "Because I prefer my justice served in a courtroom." Daniels flinched. Briggs' breathing had become shallow. "You're scheduled to appear before me tomorrow morning, correct?" Olivia asked, already knowing the answer. Neither officer responded. "That's what I thought," she said, nodding toward the other officers watching the scene unfold. "Gentlemen, I'll see you bright and early." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the precinct. The doors closed behind her, but the weight of her presence lingered, suffocating the two men left standing there, now fully aware of the storm they had just walked into. Briggs turned to Daniels, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell do we do now?" Daniels didn't answer. Because for the first time in his career, he had no idea. Morning came too fast. Daniels and Briggs sat in the hallway outside Judge Olivia Carter's courtroom, their hands clammy, their nerves frayed. The same courtroom they had strutted past hundreds of times before, always confident, always untouchable. But today, they weren't walking in as enforcers of the law. Today, they were the ones on trial. Briggs wiped his palms against his pants. "This is bad, man. This is really bad." Daniels leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Shut up, Briggs. Shut up. That's all you got. Daniels, we arrested a judge." "A judge, man. You know what that means." Daniels shot him a glare. "Yeah, I know exactly what it means. We keep our mouths shut and play it cool. It's not like she can just throw us in jail for a traffic stop." Briggs scoffed. "You sure about that?" The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and a clerk peered out. "Daniels. Briggs. You're up." Briggs swallowed hard. Daniels straightened his tie, pushing down his fear. They were still cops. They still had power. Right. They stepped inside. The room was packed. Reporters, defense attorneys, other officers who had clearly heard about what had gone down last night. Daniels and Briggs felt the weight of every stare as they walked toward the defense table. And then there she was, Judge Olivia Carter. She sat high on the bench, her posture regal, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't just dressed for court, she was armored in authority. The same woman they had shoved into the back of their cruiser now held the power to determine their future. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and Olivia finally spoke. "Officers Daniels and Briggs," she said, her voice measured. "You stand accused of racial profiling, unlawful detention, and excessive use of force. How do you plead?" Briggs' throat went dry. Daniels gritted his teeth. "Not guilty," he forced out. A pause. Olivia nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. "Very well." Then she leaned forward, resting her hands on the bench. "Tell me, officers, would you care to explain what reasonable suspicion you had for pulling me over last night?" Daniels hesitated. Briggs glanced around, realizing there was no way out of this. Not this time. The room was silent. Everyone was watching. And Olivia, she was waiting for them to squirm. "Wait. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And tell me, what would you do in this situation? Should the officers be fired, or do they deserve a second chance? Let me know below." Daniels cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. We believed the vehicle might have been stolen." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Based on what?" Briggs shifted uncomfortably. "It was a high-end car. In a neighborhood where—" Olivia held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me stop you right there, Officer Briggs. Are you saying that my car, my legally registered car, was suspicious simply because of where it was?" Briggs' mouth opened, then shut. He could feel the heat of the room pressing down on him. Olivia continued, her voice smooth but sharp. "Tell me, did you run my plates before initiating the stop?" Daniels swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor." "No," Olivia repeated, feigning surprise. "You stopped me on suspicion of a stolen vehicle but failed to check whether the vehicle was actually stolen? That's quite the oversight, wouldn't you say?" Daniels had no response. Briggs fidgeted in his seat, sweat forming at his brow. It wasn't just the car, Your Honor. You weren't following commands." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Olivia's expression remained unreadable, but her voice grew sharper. "Did I or did I not hand you my license and registration immediately upon request?" Briggs hesitated. "Yes, but—" "No buts, officer. Just yes or no." Briggs nodded weakly. "Yes. And yet, you still chose to escalate. You still chose to handcuff me, to shove me into your car, to humiliate me. Why?" Daniel's face burned red. "We were just doing our jobs." Olivia leaned back slightly, exhaling. "Just doing your jobs." She let the words linger in the air. "Tell me, officers, how many white men in high-end cars have you pulled over this month under the suspicion of driving while black?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not what we were doing." Olivia tilted her head. "Isn't it?" The courtroom was silent. Everyone in the room knew the truth, even if Daniels and Briggs refused to say it aloud. She folded her hands. "You may not think you're racists, officers. Maybe you truly believe that. But what you did last night—" Her eyes locked onto theirs. "That was racism. Plain and simple." Daniels bristled, but Briggs looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Olivia took a breath before speaking again. "I could have died last night. Briggs' head snapped up, his face pale. If I had reacted the wrong way, if I had been anyone else, we both know how that could have ended, she said, her voice heavy with meaning. And you wouldn't be sitting here today. You'd be on paid administrative leave while an internal investigation cleared you of any wrongdoing. Daniels stiffened. He knew she was right. Olivia let the weight of her words settle. So tell me, officers, should that pattern continue? Should we just let it slide? Or should there finally be accountability? Briggs' face was frozen in panic. Daniels' fists clenched against the table. They had no answer. Because for the first time in their careers, they weren't the ones holding the power. The weight of Olivia's words hung heavy in the air. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for Daniels and Briggs to respond. But they couldn't. Because there was no defense. Daniels' jaw was clenched so tight his teeth might crack. Briggs looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Olivia let the silence stretch, ensuring they felt it, the weight of what they had done, the reality of what they had become. Then she spoke again. Let's go over what you did last night, piece by piece. Her voice was calm, measured, but merciless. You saw me, a black woman, in a nice car. You immediately assumed it didn't belong to me. Instead of running my plates, instead of approaching me professionally, you escalated. You treated me like a criminal before I even opened my mouth. Briggs swallowed hard. Then, Olivia continued, when I complied, when I gave you my license and registration, you still didn't de-escalate. Instead, you chose to humiliate me. You put me in handcuffs. You laughed. You mocked me. You enjoyed it. Daniel's face was burning red now. His breathing had grown uneven. You called me sweetheart. You smirked. You wanted me to feel powerless. But tell me, officers, how does it feel now? Sitting there, knowing the world is watching. Daniels snapped. This is ridiculous, he barked, slamming his hands on the table. We weren't trying to be racist. We were just what? Olivia's voice sliced through his. Just abusing your power? Just assuming guilt before innocence? Just treating me like less than a human being? Daniels' mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tell me, Officer Daniels, she pressed, if I wasn't a judge, how would this have ended? Would I have spent the night in jail? Would I have been charged with resisting arrest for simply questioning your authority? Daniels didn't answer. He couldn't. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, his voice barely a whisper. We made a mistake. Olivia tilted her head. A mistake. Briggs nodded, his face pale. Yes. A big one. And I'm sorry. Daniels turned sharply toward him. Briggs. Briggs cut him off. No, man. We screwed up. I knew it the second Sergeant Hill told us who she was. And you know it too. He turned back to Olivia. Judge Carter, I'm not going to sit here and act like what we did was okay. It wasn't. And I don't expect you to forgive us, but... His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. The courtroom was silent. Olivia studied him, her face unreadable. Apologies are easy, Officer Briggs. Change is harder. Briggs nodded slowly. I know. Daniel sat there, his fists clenched, his face twisted in frustration. Olivia exhaled. Your arrogance, Officer Daniels, is exactly why people don't trust the police. You think you're untouchable, that your badge gives you the right to treat people however you want. But it doesn't. Not anymore. Daniel said nothing, but the vein in his neck pulsed violently. Olivia finally looked toward the court clerk. Proceed with the next phase of the hearing. The clerk nodded and shuffled the paperwork. The officers' fates were about to be decided. Briggs slumped slightly. Daniels stared at the desk. Because they both knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Every journalist, every attorney, every spectator was watching, waiting, to see what would happen next. Daniels and Briggs sat motionless, their careers dangling by a thread. Olivia tapped her fingers against the bench. The facts are clear. You violated protocol. You escalated a situation without cause. You racially profiled me. And you humiliated a citizen, an officer of the court, without justification. Briggs' head lowered slightly. Daniels, however, kept his jaw tight, his fists balled up on the table. Olivia continued. This hearing is not about whether I'm personally offended by your actions. It's about whether you are fit to wear a badge. The courtroom doors creaked open, and a man in a suit walked in, the police union attorney. Daniels' shoulders loosened slightly. Backup had arrived. The attorney wasted no time. Your Honor, with all due respect, Officers Daniels and Briggs were simply conducting a routine traffic stop. We argue that while mistakes may have been made, there is no evidence of malicious intent. Olivia smirked. No evidence? Tell me, Counselor, how many white drivers in luxury cars have these two officers stopped under the assumption the vehicle was stolen? The attorney hesitated. Let me save you some time, Olivia said. The answer is 0. Because this wasn't about routine procedure, it was about power, about intimidation, and about racism. Daniels shifted in his seat, his face twisting with anger. This is a damn witch hunt. The entire courtroom stiffened. Olivia turned her sharp gaze toward him. Excuse me. Daniels doubled down. We didn't pull you over because of your race. We pulled you over because we thought the car was suspicious. If that had been a white guy, we would have done the same thing. The room erupted in murmurs. Olivia took a deep breath. Officer Daniels, let me make something very clear to you. I don't care about your excuses. I care about the facts. And the fact is, you abused your power. Daniels scoffed. And you're abusing yours now. Briggs turned toward him in horror. Daniels, stop. But Daniels was unraveling. The pressure, the exposure, the fact that he had finally lost control, it was eating him alive. Olivia folded her hands. Officer Daniels, your arrogance is astounding. Even now, after everything, you still think you're the victim. Daniels gritted his teeth. I'm not a racist. Olivia held his gaze. Then why do you sound so desperate to convince yourself? The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Briggs let out a slow breath, looking straight ahead. Your Honor, he said quietly, whatever decision you make, I accept it. Daniels snapped his head toward him. Briggs, what the hell are you doing? Briggs didn't look at him. He knew it was over. He had known it the moment they put those cuffs on the wrong woman. Olivia exhaled, then turned to the clerk. Prepare the ruling. Briggs and Daniels sat frozen, knowing that whatever came next would change their lives forever. The courtroom was dead silent. The weight of what was about to happen sat heavy on every shoulder. Daniels and Briggs sat stiffly, waiting, bracing for their fate. The court clerk handed Olivia the final ruling. She unfolded it slowly, deliberately, letting them feel every passing second. Then, she looked up. This court finds Officers Daniels and Briggs guilty of racial profiling, unlawful detainment, and abuse of authority, she declared, her voice steady. Daniels' face darkened, but Briggs simply nodded, his shoulders slumping. Olivia continued. Officer Briggs, your willingness to admit fault is noted. You will be suspended without pay for 6 months, required to complete racial bias training, and placed under strict probation for the remainder of your time in the force. Briggs exhaled sharply. He had expected worse. Daniels, however, wasn't as lucky. Officer Daniels, Olivia said, her tone now laced with finality, your behavior, both during my arrest and here in this courtroom, has shown a complete lack of remorse. You do not represent justice. You represent everything wrong with modern policing. Daniels' fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white. I am officially revoking your badge and recommending that criminal charges be filed for your actions that night. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Daniels shot up from his seat. You can't do this, he shouted, his face burning red. I've been a cop for 15 years. You think you can just ruin my career over a damn traffic stop? Olivia didn't flinch. You ruined it yourself, she said. And this is justice. Briggs closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Daniels, however, wasn't done. You think you're some hero, he spat. You think this changes anything? This country is still gonna be the same. People like you will still get stopped, still get arrested, still... Enough. The bailiff stepped forward, gripping Daniel's arm. Daniels yanked away, shaking with rage. "This isn't over," he growled. Officer Daniels, Olivia cut in, her voice icy. "As of this moment, you are no longer an officer. You don't get to bark orders anymore." Daniels froze. For the first time in his career, he had no power. No badge. No protection. Nothing. The bailiff stepped in again, and this time, Daniels didn't resist. His head dropped as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Briggs sat still, staring at the table, his breath coming slow and heavy. Olivia leaned forward. "Officer Briggs," she said, her voice softer now. "Use this time to reflect. To change. Because next time—" Her gaze held firm. "There won't be another chance." Briggs nodded, then stood. He gave her one last look before walking out of the courtroom, carrying the weight of his choices on his shoulders. The gavel slammed down. Case closed. The courtroom emptied out, reporters rushing to break the news. Olivia sat back in her chair, finally allowing herself to breathe. Justice had been served. What do you think? Was justice really served? Should Daniels have been given another chance, or did he deserve to lose his badge? Let's discuss it in the comments. If this story shook you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories. Thanks for watching.